Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Show. I am Alex Lawson, sitting in for Thom Hartmann, and I am joined in studio by Merith from Universities Allied for Essential Medicines, and we're talking about drug prices being too high, and I want to take a caller, but I'm not actually hearing anything in my earpiece at the moment, so I'm not sure if we can take a caller yet. So for the minute, why don't you and I talk about pick up where we were, that maybe let's pick one thing, insulin, for example, as a topic that we can, because it is complicated. So let's just kind of look into insulin.
Sure. So like we started with EpiPen we were talking about, and this is, insulin is a little different. It's actually almost 100 years old. It was discovered in 1922. And what's interesting about the story, and also why it fits into UAM and the university angle, is because Banting and Best, who discovered it and went on to win a Nobel Prize, they'd seen so much suffering and death of children with type 1 diabetes in Canada that they decided to give the patent, basically for $1, or some people say for free, to the University of Toronto, so that it would be a public good. And yet, you know, nearly 100 years later, globally, 1 in 2 people who need access to insulin still do not have it, which tells us that there is some major problems. And here in the United States, the price of insulin has gone up dramatically. And in some cases, specific insulins, sort of 300% in the last 5 years. And you hear stories of people who are saying they can't afford to choose between their insulin. They have to choose between their insulin, their mortgage, their food, whatever it might be. And, you know, these are problems that you don't associate with the United States of America, or shouldn't. And it's a real issue. And we wonder why the price is high. The price is high because in the United States, in particular, where we pay more for our drugs than anywhere else in the world, the market for insulin is dominated by 3 major pharmaceutical corporations. And so there's really no generic competition yet. There are some companies that are sort of going into this arena, but they haven't yet, because insulin is a biosimilar. It's not, it's a little bit more complex. So the market is controlled by a monopoly, basically.
Mm-hmm. Even though there are 3 companies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's monopoly just means as long as they're actually acting together and fixing their prices together, or just following along, then we're still seeing monopoly pricing.
Because it's not about patents really anymore. That's what's interesting, is that a lot of these drugs are now off patent. Even the newer analog insulins are off patent. There's no patent on the human insulins, which sort of came before, which are, as well, according to the World Health Organization, there's no difference in health outcomes if you use a human insulin or you use an analog insulin. But what we are seeing is this concept of evergreening. So you see a drug which is coming, especially near to the end of its patent cliff of, say, 20 years, and corporations are making minor tweaks, which really shouldn't be considered innovations, and they're then able to get additional time, which enables the prices to be maintained or increase. And the other piece is that a lot of the devices that you need to...
Let's go on that one for a second, and you were just going to get into devices, because EpiPen is in a similar situation. It's not IP, it's not patent that's granting its monopoly. But on the insulin front, just because I want to keep getting back to incentives so we can talk about the system, is when the incentive is for these companies to actually spend their time figuring out some useless little molecular tweak so that they can keep making monopoly rents off of these very old things like insulin, then they are not at all, like, is that company going to spend any money trying to come up with a new thing? Are they going to spend any money? Are they incentivized to actually compete with new treatments, better treatments, cures, more innovation and invention? The answer is no, because the whole system, their money, their cash cow is not based on that. It's based on a useless tweak to the molecule because that allows them to continue to extract these monopoly rents. I think I saw that insulin, the markup is somewhere around 3,000%, right? I mean, like that is not regular old business, right? That is only possible when you're extracting these monopoly rents. And so that is again showing that without a systemic change, we're going to be talking about this again and again and again. I mean, when something like insulin, which is 100 years old, we're still talking about it on that. You know, without looking fundamentally on changing things, we're going to see it again and again and again. I keep saying this, but this is usually normal. We're going to talk about some of the ways we can change the system to get to incentivize the right things. But in the final couple seconds here, I want to it's not just patents, and this is important. Patents are part of it. It's monopolies granted in whatever way that they're granted, and that they are a privilege and not an absolute right is the key here. So that's what I want to talk to you about.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit Thom.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann program. I am Alex Lawson with the great honor of sitting in for Thom Hartmann today. We're talking with Merith from Universities Allied for Essential Medicines about why drug prices are so high. And I've been teasing our listeners along the whole hour to what can we do about it. So I want to get into that in this last part of the hour. What can we do about it? What are some of the ideas about taking on these high drug prices? I think we've done a good job showing that it's not just patents, although patents are part of it, and the corporations spend a lot of time trying to pick up. They buy companies based on what patents that company holds. And I think Pharma Bro Shkreli, people understand that's what his business model was, and then jack up the price there. But any monopoly, whether through price fixing, like with insulin, where these companies are acting in collusion, which, by the way, should already be enforceably illegal, or with the EpiPen, where they are acting as a monopoly, not because of IP, but because they are because they have a 94% market share. That's the problem. What can we do to address that larger problem?
The good news is there are solutions, and I think that's the starting point. We are a group of allied organizations working together around a couple of key issues to ensure affordability and availability of drugs, life-saving drugs here in the United States. About an hour ago, I mentioned that the National Institutes of Health here in Bethesda gives approximately $31 billion a year to universities through grants. And then there's innovation that is carried out at those universities by researchers, young doctors, students, etc. One of the things that we can do, which would require only executive action, it wouldn't require a change in the law, is basically to urge the NIH, probably through executive action by the president or the next president of the United States of America, to strengthen the conditions that they attach to these grants so that any drug that is developed with public money will remain affordable for the public in the future.
So this goes back to the very first thing we talked about, how UAEM, the genesis of UAEM was around this one drug. And the corporation says, that's impossible. We have the right to make as much, but it's not absolute.
Absolutely.
And so it's very possible, and not only possible, we have to actually attach some conditions onto anything that can grant a monopoly like this on life-saving or life-extending drugs. If you don't attach conditions, we will just find ourselves in the same situation over and over and over again. But it's also totally feasible. And it actually is kind of like, well, why didn't we do this in the first place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what we found, our students are mobilizing around this issue all across the United States. But we traditionally have gone university by university, like the Yale story in 2001, going group by group, trying to encourage universities to adopt these licensing and patenting rules, or a framework basically that would ensure access and affordability, primarily in low and middle income countries, but the world was very different then. And now we see these high drug prices here in the United States. These issues have come home to roost because we haven't been able to effectively solve them yet. So rather than go to 2,500 universities in the United States and others around the world, we're also working in other countries, we said, let's focus on the upstream piece. Let's focus on NIH and say, hey, isn't it time that you put the public first?
So Social Security Works, the organization that I run, is working with you as part of this, because it is, as you say, right now there's a moment, because we're seeing these high drug prices in America create a political outrage that is the predicate to action. Yeah. And we have a real possibility here. So Social Security Works, we're seeing a lot of folks who, with Social Security, they didn't get a COLA, a cost of living adjustment last year. They're going to, next month, they're going to learn that they get a 0.2% COLA next year. And yet they're seeing their drug prices go up 10, 15% year after year after year. And that's why they're standing together with university students and with a broad-based coalition to say, we have to do these systemic changes to lower drug prices. The one you talked about is saying, let's actually talk to NIH. So the president, the next president, could say, NIH, you should definitely attach conditions to the grants that you give out. The $33 billion that you give out can have conditions. They can say, something like, the price of this drug, anything created with this money cannot be priced above the average of 7 OECD countries, what the price in other countries. And another one that says, and should be affordable, and there should be access in low and middle income countries, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two key pieces. One thing is actually really within the existing rights that the NIH has already, which is saying that actually the government has the right, in theory, to walk in or march in and take back control in usually this is for an emergency setting, but it could also be used for high drug pricing when people cannot afford a drug like this $129,000 prostate cancer drug. The government could march in. So we can set triggers to say, at this price, we need to do something about this. We can march in and we can take control.
So that's a technical term that all it really means is saying, if this company is going to be able to make oodles of money, and they will, and they still can. And I think that we could envision a system where that is not the case. But this is just a step along the way. Yeah. They're still going to make enormous profits. It's just saying, if you get reckless and abusive with what you're doing and you can't contain yourself and you raise the price up so that people don't have access to it, at that point, the government who grants you the privilege in the first place is going to have a mechanism to offer alternatives. And that is just like, that doesn't occur right now is kind of, I think, a bizarre thing.
Well, yes, because the current rights sort of suggest that if a drug is available, then it's affordable. And that's where the murky waters lie. And we want to make this very clear, that affordability is absolutely necessary here in the United States. And the second piece is this global access licensing to ensure that any going back to this HIV/AIDS story at Yale and this drug, it's really the same part of that same process, saying that anything that's developed with taxpayer money here in the United States should also be available and affordable for the people who need it. There's no point in having an HIV/AIDS drug that is so expensive that the people who need it in low and middle income countries cannot afford it. Otherwise, you're not curing disease if a drug sits on a shelf.
So these are very obvious solutions, and I think that we have a moment to really push on those. There are others. There are ones that are even more obvious to me. Why can't we import drugs from all around the world? Why can't I buy drugs that are the same drug, but it's at a reasonable price in another country, I should be able to import that into this country. We can import lettuce or sneakers or anything else except for drugs. That's something that the next president can change with the signature of a pen, right? That's something that can change with executive action. There are a lot of ideas around executive action. There are a lot of legislative ideas too, right? I mean, like, there are good ones, and next year there's some possibility, because the outrage on drug prices is bipartisan.
Yes.
So there are some ideas with new legislation that would. My favorite one is that this is somehow seen as radical, but this is a right idea. This is to the right, that it is somehow seen as radical, where you're like, what? That we would just know how these companies actually spend their money, right? Which we just shorthand as transparency measures. But it's just that they can't lie and obfuscate how they spend their money, because they lie to the public and say, we spend all of our money developing all these drugs, and if you don't allow us to rip you off every day, you're right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's no ability for us to be like, you're lying.
Yeah, I mean, it's smoke and mirrors, basically. And I think, you know, some of the figures and research that's already been done will show that about 40 to 60% of that figure is really not research and development. It's sales and marketing.
Right. Which they actually call research. They say this the free samples that they give out to clinics and offices, they will count that in their market, in their research budget, their R&D. They'll say, oh, that's a research, that's marketing research. And you're like, no, that's sales.
And advertising. I mean, advertising in a lot of countries around the world is not allowed. That's something that is...
because it shouldn't be allowed. And again, you'll have broad agreement on that. Now, those are things that I think there is some opportunity it will take legislation. This town is not in a place where legislation happens easily, but there is, I think, because of the political setup, because the Republicans rely on voters who are just as outraged about high drug prices as the Democrats, and I think there's a moment where they could compete on drug prices. So in the last minute here, how can the listeners and viewers, how can they find out more about your organization? How can they take part in lowering drug prices?
A couple of ways. You can find more information on our website, which is uaem.org. If there are students or faculty in particular at universities, please reach out to us. We're very interested in engaging the grassroots. That's really our core focus. And there's lots of other ways on the website that you can check out. But obviously, we're a small NGO. If anybody wants to reach out or is interested in donating, they're very welcome.
At uaem.org.
Yes.
In the final couple seconds here, I don't think I'm wearing rose-colored glasses. I think we can actually get something done in the next presidency to lower drug prices.
Absolutely.
So you're in agreement on that?
I am full agreement.
And I think that Hillary Clinton has actually put forward a plan that is at least acknowledging that she can do things through executive action.
It's real.
It is real. That's something that we can look forward to. So we'll be back right after this break, and we'll continue the discussion on a related side of this, which is how does the TPP and how does the pharmaceutical influence in those trade deals lead to high drug prices?